it wants to stay on more level ground.
Me too.
And yeah, just
It's your trail bike.
I don't know if I come on. Welcome back to Quebec and our short travel field test. Speaking of not a lot of travel, Ibis's 100mm Exie is all about low weight and efficiency, and the frame is also built in their factory in Northern California. Ibis says that the frame comes in at under 2,000 grams, and they use words like World Cup capable cross-country race bike that flat out shreds. Now they're talking a big game, but the Exie's rear suspension is handled by the latest version of the DW Link system, a layout renowned for its pedaling efficiency. And there's a 120mm travel fork up front that should make this thing more capable than your average hold on for dear life cross-country bike. Now we do have more affordable bikes here at this field test, but this US-made Exie ain't one of them. Our X01 build with carbon wheels rings up at $10,048 American. Let's find out how efficient and capable the new Exie is on the trail. All right guys, you've been riding Ibis's new Exie here in Mont-Saint-Anne, Quebec. Now Ibis makes a lot of claims about this bike, including that it's ready for World Cup cross country, which tells me that the thing must be efficient and fast. Now conveniently enough, we're here at the Mont-Saint-Anne World Cup course as well. We've ridden the bike. What did you think, Sarah? Is that thing super efficient?
Yeah, one of the first laps I did was actually on the Exie, and we took it on that Mont-Saint-Anne World Cup course, and I forgot how steep those climbs are and twisty and like lack of traction, and I was really glad that I had that Exie with me because it just, you know, makes light work. It's really light, really efficient, has great traction, and yeah, I felt like I could climb.
Yeah, I was watching you up some of that stuff, and they were pretty tricky, like rocky, steppy things, and it just looked like a good mix of traction, but also efficiency as well, like especially compared to the Lapierre mat, which doesn't give you that forgiveness.
definitely not.
Yeah, maybe you could contrast the two of those bikes in that kind of setting that Sarah was talking about. Like, does one provide more traction than the other?
For sure. Just looking at the Exie, you know, they both look like light bikes, but the difference there was the DW Link, and it definitely gave you good traction, but it just felt like it delivered the power too. Like, you didn't get hung up on anything, which is always going forward, moving up. The rear wheel was on the ground, and despite only having 100 mils of travel.
Now, I have one more question about climbing before we move on. I know a bike like this, a bike that's meant for cross-country racing, it's gonna come with a lockout no matter what I happen to think about it. Ibis didn't call me up and ask me if it should, but it has. Nobody should, but it has a lockout. Sarah, does this thing need a lockout? Because it's kind of awkward to reach and stuff. Like,
I feel like this is like a biased question. Like,
yes. Yes.
You want me to say no, it doesnly need a lockout.
You're not gonna say that.
Like, if you're a cross-country racer, like every second counts. Like, races are won in the like finish line sprint. You know, we're even seeing like in enduro races or downhill races that, you know, racers are playing with lockouts. So in cross-country, like, I mean, if you were using this on like a marathon cross-country too, like BC Bike Race, you've done that. Sometimes you start with like a 10-minute climb on pavement.
I just
like
walk.
if you've got a lockout, like you're gonna use it, you know? And there's tons of applications where I think, it makes sense on this bike for sure.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, even just like the placebo effect mentally, you know, like the bike is locked out. You think you're going faster, you are going faster. But let's move on from smooth fire road climbs. Matt, technical climbing, you're in a tangle of roots and rocks, tight corners. What's the story?
Yeah, this Ibis was really cool actually. Like I said, it only had 100 mils of travel, but it felt like more, even while climbing, but in a good way. Like, yeah, the wheels stayed on the ground. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the rear end of the bike, but moving on to the front.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that they did push the boundaries of the spec for an Exie race bike, but with a head angle that steep at 67 degrees.
The steepest here.
The steepest here. It just makes the handling a little bit twitchy. And so a longer stem would kind of slow that steering down.
Yeah. In the tight technical stuff, how did this thing fare with that? Like, I would assume you'd want a tight turning, twitchy little bike for that kind of terrain, but you think you can get the better of both worlds with maybe a little bit longer stem?
I think so. It was actually more on like the undulating stuff where you're trying to push the bike through compressions and then power up, muscle up through things.
Yeah.
Just reefing on the bars a little bit, it just kind of wanted to wander back and forth, and I think slowing that down would kind of calm the bike down a little bit more.
Okay, Exie bikes go up the hill fast. That's not exactly news. Let's talk about what happens when you point that Exie back down the hill, Matt. I want to hear about the handling. We talked about that 67-degree head angle, but it does have a short stem, wide handlebar. It's got, you know, a seat that disappears underneath you. What does this thing do on the descents?
Just looking at it, it definitely looks spindly. It looks steep. It's quite a small, compact bike, so you do feel a little bit more on top of it, but the suspension definitely backs it up a little bit more. It packs more into that 100 mils of travel than you would expect. It has quite a bit of forgiveness off the top, unlike some of the other Exie bikes we have in test here. But it also has good amount of progression built in too. So like, it didn't bottom out hard. I was able to push that bike relatively good on that descent.
Okay, Sarah, I want to talk about the handling for a minute with you. 67-degree head angle, that's going to work in a lot of places. But you know where it might not work?
When it gets steep?
Yeah. When it gets
Yeah,
steep.
absolutely. Yeah, we were exploring. You know, we're in Quebec. We're riding 5 different locations. You know, we don't know all the trails that we're getting into. So
I don't know any of the trails.
there's a couple that it's like, oh yeah, that looks fine, and you start at the trail, and you know, like some bikes you can just kind of, you know, ride it blind. It'll be fine. And this bike was definitely like, I was a little cautious, like looking over the edge. Okay, Matt made that look okay. Levy did that. I could do it. Okay, but like definitely being a little bit more cautious on the downhills on this bike. You know, it's not just a bike that you're like charging. You know, you're definitely charging on the climbs, and then when it comes to the descents, you're just a little bit more cautious.
Right. Matt, with that steepish, relatively steepish head angle, can you maybe expand a little bit on what Sarah said? Picture yourself going down something steep. What's happening? I'm picturing all my weight going forward over the front axle.
Yeah, so that's kind of where that short stem counteracts that a little bit. You are able to get your weight back over the bike, so it doesn't feel like your legs are pushing you forward and you're way over the front, all the weight's on the fork, it's diving, you're getting pushed into the corners. Some of those steeper corners on the Exie, the bike felt a little bit more balanced and you could get off the back easier.
Yeah, because you were saying the opposite about the BMC as well. And I know that we're going to touch on suspension a little bit there because there's some differences there that affect that, but it sounds like you were actually almost surprised about how well this bike did on the downs?
The Exie for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was also very comfortable. Like it wasn't jarring at any point, and whether that's the frame and the suspension, it just felt easier to ride and more relaxed in terms of like the feedback.
Okay, let's talk about that frame for a minute. Ibis says this thing weighs under 2,000 grams. Matt, you talk a lot about frame rigidity and stuff like that. You definitely notice that kind of stuff more than I do. So what did you make of this super light frame? Did this thing feel underbuilt?
I mean, I don't expect this to be as hard hitting as one of their enduro bikes, and it wasn't noodly or flexy by any means. I would say it felt a little bit more comfortable than the BMC and the LaPierre, especially in terms of like the frame rigidity. So you're going across chattery roots and rocks on off cambers. There was a lot more compliance, and like the bike felt like it was hooking and tracking and staying exactly where you pointed it. But then also the suspension too was just a little bit softer at the beginning.
All right, this is a field test, and these are some pretty sporty bikes, and that means, of course, we're gonna do timed testing.
You volunteered for that, right?
And by we, I meant Sarah.
I drew the short straw on that one. You used to race XC, so you gotta do the time testing.
So did you.
Yeah.
Okay, how did this play out? It's pretty fast, isn't it?
Yeah, so the Exie was the fastest of all the bikes on the climb.
Only on the climb?
Only on the climb, yeah. And then it was 4th on the descent.
Okay.
And then overall, that gave it the fastest lap.
Tied with?
Oh, tied with the Allied, sorry.
There you go. And you know what, Matt, I think that says a lot about this bike, because the Allied, I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen that review or if it's even out yet, but like, we all love that bike. We were super impressed with the suspension. We loved how it handled. So for this thing to set the same lap time, pretty impressive, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to break down our timed test track, it did have a lot of roots and it had a lot of flat sections that led into sharp corners. And I think that's where just sort of the comfort of that suspension and the frame of the Exie lend to the faster times.
Okay, let's go over the models. Now, ours is the middle of the road Exie with carbon wheels and the Ibis house branded hubs, and that retails for $10,048 American.
Right.
What are the other two models?
So there is the starter pack that comes with the XT components. That one goes for $7,999 US.
Just getting into riding.
That's the starter pack.
That's what it takes to race XC. Then you move up to the X01 that we had. That one starts at $9,199, but there are 2 wheel options for the first 2 builds. You can get the carbon Ibis wheels with Ibis hubs, or you can upgrade that again to the Industry 9 Hydra hubs with the 390 points of engagement or something like that. Yeah.
Those are the ones I want.
All your friends hear you coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Then if you want all the carbon, all the gizmos, you can go up to the XX1 Axis, and that one goes for a whopping $12,799 USD.
Jesus. Let's talk about the components that are on our test bike. This one came with Ibis's carbon wheels. This is the new version of the carbon wheels. I've had nothing but good experiences with Ibis's wheels in the past. What did you guys think of the wheels?
Yeah, they seem great. They did everything wheels should do. They're round.
They stayed round.
They stayed round.
It sounds like they were sort of invisible.
Yeah,
and they're light
totally.
as hell. So I mean, did they feel stiff enough?
Yeah, we're not gonna get into that too much because that can be sort of a personal preference, but I wouldn't say there was any harsh feedback from them. Never had any dents or issues, cracks. And the points of engagement were pretty good on this rear hub. This is the middle of the road one that we talked about. So I didn't see any need to upgrade to the Hydra right away, but it is an option if you're looking for it.
Right. The bike yoke dropper post too, worked well?
Yep, that's a killer component. You've got that little lever that is built into the seat post. So if you do need to bleed the system, you simply do that on the bike, no need for any tools.
When you need to bleed the system.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had good luck with that one. I've
Fair enough.
been riding that
Fair
for
enough.
a while, but yeah.
Fair enough. It also comes with a chain guide, which is worth pointing out. And this is just a little bolt-on plastic thing. If you want to lose 10 or 15 more grams, you could ditch it. Sarah, what did you make of the X01 build that they combined with XT brakes?
Honestly, I liked that combination, and the cockpit didn't look messy or anything. The brakes worked well. I think it's suitable.
The cockpit did look kind of messy. There were some cables.
It's the lockout.
It is the lockout, yeah.
We can't, it's got a lockout. They're gonna look a little messy with a lockout.
XT brakes, Matt, bite point on those. What's the story, consistent or not?
These ones were pretty good.
Good.
I did notice there was a little bit of wandering with the rear one. That could be due to the 160 rotor out back. So like it could be heating up a little bit if there's like the tiniest bit of air in there. Who knows?
Who knows? All right, we're gonna talk about pros and cons. Sarah, you're a happy person. I want you to do the happy stuff first.
Okay, I'm only gonna do all the happy stuff for all these bikes. All the brands are gonna love me. They're gonna call you when they have any.
They already do.
So yeah, I'd say first of all, like this bike is made in the USA, which is pretty cool. It's super light, really good looking frame. And then it's just like a really good balance of efficiency, comfort, and
Traction.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not an easy line to walk when you're talking about these bikes, because there's people out there that just want this thing to just be as efficient as possible. And this thing, it feels really efficient, but it still provides tons of traction, so.
Totally.
Okay, Sarah's covered the pros. I want you to cover the stuff that you didn't like.
Okay, well, I normally don't mention the price because there are so many options out there in the bike world, but this is Ibis's only XC race-focused bike, and it comes in very expensive. It is a great frame, so we'll leave that one floating kind of.
I just want to add one thing to that. It's one of 2 US made frames we have here, and both of them are, relatively close to the same price. So they're both quite expensive.
The next thing up would have to be that the chainstays are the same length on every size of the bike.
Does that matter on a bike like this?
I mean, they did adjust the seat tube angle per size, which is cool since they're changing the front triangle per size anyways.
Yep.
But I think maybe some tall people, if they're in the XL category with those seat posts way up, they could find, especially with the short stem, that combo might be a little bit trickier to get up some of the steeper climbs.
Right. Now, also, we did talk about that head angle a little bit, and I think we all agreed that it kind of suited the bike, but I also see it here listed on your con list.
Well, it did stand out as the steepest bike in our test, and we did find that even though the bike was comfortable to ride downhill, there was a certain limit to it that maybe fell a little bit short compared to the other bikes.
Yeah, how I would word that probably would be like, if it was a little slacker, I don't think it would be any slower or any more of a handful on like tricky climbs, but you would gain more confidence on the downs, right?
I think that's very fair.
Yeah, okay. And then, Matt, lockout lever. You have it on your list here.
It is messy. I think it is necessary on a bike like this since we mentioned all those race factors. But for me, the dropper lever was closest to the grip, and then further inboard, there was the thumb control for the lockout. And if it was me, I'd maybe want like a grip shift, which might not jive with everybody's taste, or I'd transfer that to the top side of the right hand.
Yeah.
But I didn't find myself like messing up, like accidentally, you know, locking it out or.
Unlike the Lapierre. Yeah, exactly. So this isn't a great lockout setup, but it's also not the worst.
Definitely not the worst.
All right, as always, we wrap these field test reviews up by talking about who this bike best suits. Sarah, I think this is pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, some of the other bikes we might be like on the edge of, you know, who is this actually for, but I think this one is super obvious. It's for a racer, somebody who's, you know, pretty serious, maybe racing national level, aspiring to World Cup level, and they just want a bike that's fast and it's gonna progress with them.
Now I'm gonna counter that with a question. Both of you guys talked about how for 100 mils, this thing is relatively forgiving. Comes with a little short stem, wide handlebar like we talked about, big dropper posts. Like, I feel like I might put a burlier set of tires on this thing and call it my trail bike. Am I silly for doing that?
I thought you were gonna say Downcountry.
No, I would never say that. No.
I don't think this is quite that bike.
Yep.
It is comfortable to ride. It does have a bit of forgiveness, good traction, all those things we talked about, but it's quite poised. It wants to stay on more level ground.
Me too.
And yeah, just
It's your trail bike.
it's not quite as forgiving in terms of making mistakes on the trail, getting offline, you know.
Yep, I get that. All right, everybody, there you go. That is our review of Ibis's new 100mm travel Exie cross-country race bike. If you guys have any questions or comments, put them down below this review and we'll answer them. And make sure to stay tuned for more videos from our Quebec Downcountry field test.